let me try to propose a thought experiment I've been grappling with recently. So we've already firmly established that property and person are the same thing effectively, right? You are your own property. You are your own most personal form of property, and that private property emerges as an extension of that self-ownership, which is like this a priori truth. You own yourself, only you can move your arms and legs, etc. If we just hypothetically imagined somehow that everyone in the world was totally invincible and impervious to physical harm, which is to say their own property in themselves was completely inviolable. Like, you couldn't hurt me, you can't kill me, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we'll just leave out the private property extension for a moment. But if you just had that, if everyone was invincible, clearly the state would be totally irrelevant at that point. Even on its own, if it's ostensibly there to provide security, security would not be necessary. Everyone's invincible, right? And further to that point, it's like, who would ever couple themselves in one political body where if there's a difference of opinion, you just go elsewhere, right? Like, there's no need for security because everyone's invincible. So there's no nation state model. So everyone's kind of like this ideal sovereign individual. And so, all right, sorry, I'm struggling to say this. The thought experiment I'm proposing is that the further we move along that spectrum to where if we're perfectly invincible, we have perfectly inviolable property, let's just say in our person, the closer we move to that ideal state, the less relevant government is, basically. So we could also say that the more cost-effective we can defend property, the less relevant the business model of the state is.
That is true insofar that the definition of the quote-unquote business model of the state is to break property. So if you have invincible or how did you call it? Invincible property rights? No.
Invulnerable people, I guess.
Yeah. Invulnerable people. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
That then indeed the state becomes, well, meaningless, because ultimately the state is a thief. If you cannot be stolen from, ergo there is no state. Yes. So I guess that's a true statement. But again, it doesn't really hold in the differentiation of common thief and state. Mm-hmm. Your thought experiment treats both examples the same way. Even though they're very different. And again, the state is. So with a small scale thief, he can still rob from you and make your life miserable. But for one, he doesn't do so at a large scale. So I guess scale is one definition of a thief. Of the state. But then also it's that the thief does not, or the highway robber does not kind of pretend to do you something good. Mm-hmm. Right? He doesn't spin this whole mythology about the state granted privileges that are handed out, like security or healthcare or transportation. He doesn't pretend that in order to rob you, he actually benefits you. So this is kind of what Rothbard pointed out earlier in this chapter, right? That the state is kind of this great myth that was spun up, and that this is one key differentiation. And again, in your thought experiment, I'm not sure if that differentiation is made. I'm not sure if that's important, though.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. So and this gets back to the point where a free market actor can defend against or insure themselves against sporadic criminal activity, like being robbed or things like this. But when it's systemized, when the political means of wealth acquisition is systemized, as Oppenheimer says, you cannot insure against that, right? It's institutionalized, it's legalized. You're completely subject to the whim of the authority.
Quick thing. You cannot insure against this in the white market. You can very much insure against this in the black market.
Correct. That's a key differentiator. So I guess but the state is losing, again, the further we move along that continuum towards inviolable property, the state is losing its capacity to draw those lines around the quote unquote white market and black market, right? Because it's just less relevant, less able to coerce, less able to generate revenues. Therefore, it's a smaller enterprise. So it seems like try to bring this back to Bitcoin. Our aim as free market actors has to be to make capital that's harder to steal, right? More abundant, harder to steal. I guess this could be both the capital we're making and the systems we're using to trade that capital and allocate it. That seems to me like what the founding values of the US Constitution are based on, like this limited government, decentralized government, democracy. All of these things are sort of aimed at what free market principles are really trying to get at, which is to make property unassailable and therefore the state unnecessary.
Yes, I think that's in generally a good strategy. And I think it was worth trying to this limited state idea, because it does seem right. It's basically the big question of, can we trust third parties?
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the big question. If we all hand over our power to this third entity, and therefore we're all kind of sheep and we cannot hurt each other because there's always a higher power above us, that would work out nice. And it does, as long as that third party remains honest and in good faith. The question just, what's the game theory? Once you have the ultimate power to allocate every scarce resource to whatever you seek fit, how are you going to use that power? Mm-hmm. And there are no limitations that you could set to that power. This is limitless power. And that's, I think, why limited government ultimately fails. The incentive is, once you got it all, you're just going to make sure that first of all, you use that power of resource allocation. You will want to meddle in all types of things. That's, of course, steal real property. That's, of course, relocate people. That's to go into slave labor and things like this. Mm-hmm. That's all just or to meddle with resource shipments and resource allocation in all shapes and forms, right? And that's the other thing, right? If you try to impose that limitation with state-created entities, like, for example, a Supreme Court, right? So the Supreme Court is staffed by the state leaders, right? The president, I believe, and he's paid by taxes, right? So by tax revenue, the Supreme Courts. So they have zero interest to limit the state authority because they are the authority of the state. They are, the Supreme Court is the ultimate of the ultimate in terms of resource allocation. They get to say what's right and what's wrong and who has to pay up. And so that's a massive power, and that power will not restrict itself. Humans are too greedy for that.
Yeah, I think this is really important. That maybe this is a key point that helped me grapple with it. Maybe it helps others. Every human organization is a business. Like we commonly call, the state or this institution or this Supreme Court or this or that. But they're all businesses ultimately. If they're not creating a bottom line for someone, then they don't exist, right? So yeah, I think you have to think about it in these terms. And it seems like, well, I'm going to read an excerpt here where, in my opinion, Rothbard is explaining the state as a business effectively and why it is impossible to have limited government. Basically, and this will be, clearly he's not writing about Bitcoin. This is written before Bitcoin, but I would hold out the proposition that limited government is impossible without Bitcoin. So let me read his excerpt. The more the coercive powers of the state are expanded beyond the cherished limits of the laissez-faire theorist, the greater the power and pelf accruing to the ruling caste operating the state apparatus. Hence, the ruling caste, eager to maximize its power and wealth, will stretch state power and will encounter only feeble opposition given the legitimacy it and its allied intellectuals are gaining, and given the lack of any institutional free market channels of resistance to the government's monopoly of coercion and the power of ultimate decision making. On the free market, it is a happy fact that the maximization of wealth of one person or group redounds to the benefit of all. But in the political realm, the realm of the state, a maximization of income and wealth can only accrue parasitically to the state and its rulers at the expense of the rest of society. So, isn't Bitcoin that institutional free market channel of resistance that we've been lacking to hold the state in check since time immemorial?